For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Britain's High Court says WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange cannot be extradited to the United States on espionage charges unless U.S. authorities guarantee he will not receive the death penalty. The ruling is a partial victory for Assange, who published classified U.S. government documents that expose potential war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. He faces up to 175 years in prison in the U.S. Stella Assange, his wife, welcomed the ruling, speaking outside the High Court today.
The courts recognize that Julian is exposed to a flagrant denial of his freedom of expression rights, that he is being discriminated against on the basis of his nationality, an Australian, and that he remains exposed to the death penalty. And yet, what the courts have done have been to invite a political intervention from the United States, to send a letter saying it's all okay. I find this astounding.
Two judges said if no assurances are filed by the U.S., they will grant Assange permission to appeal extradition on grounds including breach of freedom of expression and because he might receive the death penalty. Stella Assange urged the U.S. to drop the charges. The case has been adjourned until May 20th. Protests outside the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. this morning as the nation's high court hears arguments in its first abortion case since conservative justices overturned the constitutional right to an abortion 2 years ago. Abortion rights advocates blocked traffic outside the High Court, staging a sit-in. The justices are considering the ease of access to mifepristone, a medication that was used in nearly 2/3 of all abortions in the U.S. last year. Opponents want the justices to ratify a Fifth Circuit appeals court ruling to limit access to mifepristone, one of two drugs used in medication abortions, reversing FDA-eased regulations on the drug. Mary Ziegler, a legal historian and law professor at the University of California, Davis, says the ruling could also lead to enabling a nationwide abortion ban.
There's a possibility that the court will address the Comstock Act, which is a 19th century obscenity law, which some abortion opponents are hoping the Trump administration, if there is a second Trump administration, will treat as a de facto ban on all abortions. So there are a lot of explosive possibilities that we could see in the case.
The ruling could also be dramatic in halting mail delivery of mifepristone, reducing when in pregnancy it could be used, and ending telehealth visits at which the drug could be prescribed. A high court decision is expected by early summer. Former President Donald Trump's first of 4 criminal trials will begin April 15th, this one related to hush money payments to an adult film star who alleged an extramarital affair. Trump blasted the decision by a New York judge to allow the case to go forward. He'll now have to campaign during a criminal trial. In a separate civil fraud hearing in New York Monday, an appeals court agreed to hold off collecting Trump's $454 million civil fraud judgment if he can put up $175 million bond within 10 days. The Pentagon says Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will meet with Israel's Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant today and discuss ways to address the Hamas threat other than conducting a ground invasion into the southern city of Rafah. The meeting comes despite Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu canceling the meeting after the UN Security Council voted on a ceasefire and the U.S. declined to veto it. Christopher Martinez reports.
The resolution calls for a lasting, sustainable ceasefire in Gaza. It also demands the immediate release of hostages, although it does not make a ceasefire dependent on the hostage release. Barbara Woodward is the UK's ambassador. She calls for the resolution to be implemented immediately.
The intense suffering of innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza shows no sign of abating, and a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding before our eyes. The resolution sends a clear and united message on the need for international humanitarian law to be upheld and for aid to be scaled up urgently, including the lifting of all barriers impeding its delivery.
The United States has vetoed several earlier ceasefire resolutions, but this time the U.S. cast a rare abstention. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield explained.
Still, certain key edits were ignored, including our request to add a condemnation of Hamas.
Palestine's ambassador, Riyad Mansour, said all countries should come together to see the ceasefire resolution is enforced.
Tell them help is on the way. Hold accountable those who inflicted such suffering upon them. End this injustice. End it now.
Reporting for Pacifica Radio News KPFA, I'm Christopher Martinez.
And a search is underway in Baltimore for survivors of a bridge collapse after a container ship rammed into it, causing it to snap and plunge into the river below. Several vehicles fell into the chilly waters. At least 2 people were rescued. It's unclear what caused the ship to crash into the Francis Scott Key Bridge or how many people might be in the water. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.